So when the bad boss question comes up, I do think as a coach, sometimes you have to play devil's advocate and go, well, let's explore that for a second. A lot of the time, perception is a key player in this. And people sometimes label somebody as a bad boss when what they actually mean is they're a different management style. And I feel stressed or uncomfortable within that. So I'm going to blame the boss.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul.
Hey, I'm Ricky.
And the question is, it's a good one for you, Ricky. How do I deal with a bad boss?
Are we talking within the realms of what's legal or?
As a coach, because this is part of our Insights from Coaching series, remember?
Oh, yes, of course.
This is a mini-series of The Question Is, which is exploring questions that often come up when we're coaching people. So when faced with this question, my boss is a... How might we respond?
Well, as you know, Paul, I've got lots of experience of this. Coaching people in this situation is what I meant. You can hear I'm lying through my teeth as I say this, of course, but
so basically what you're saying is you have lots of experience of being a bad boss.
Well, I would hope not, and it'd be interesting that this might lead into another podcast that we've got.
Am I a bad boss?
Yeah. It's not therapy, this.
No.
But around feedback, because as a bad boss, if I don't get any feedback,
how do I know? Yeah.
How am I ever going to know? But I think step one really is, what's the definition of a bad boss? What is it they do? What is it they say? How do they behave?
I'm glad you've gone there, because one of the things that always occurs to me when somebody comes to me and goes, I've got a really tough boss or I've got a really bad boss, is to go, bullying and performance management don't look that different from different perspectives.
Well, yeah, because they're potentially, depending on your mindset, they're two sides of the same coin, right? You're asking me what I'm doing, how I'm getting along, and if I feel like perhaps a little bit vulnerable in my performance, I might see that as bullying and somebody picking on me.
Yeah, so you might perceive your boss to be toxic or difficult or challenging. Particularly, and I see this a lot, particularly if you used to work for somebody who was very laid back and easygoing, and now you've got somebody who's come in, maybe brought in deliberately to turn around a department or to drive some increased performance. You see this a lot in, we work with a lot of commercial teams. You see this a lot in sales teams, where sales team may have become a little stagnant, and the senior team will then bring in a new sales manager who will then start managing people, who will go, I want to visit customers with you, and I want to check what your funnel looks like, and I want to talk about your account plans. And that can easily be mistaken for my boss hates me or my boss is toxic.
You know what's really interesting? Because I'm actually coaching somebody right now who's a real...
You're supposed to be doing a podcast.
Oh, I beg your pardon. They're reorganized the structure within the organization, which has led to a change in boss. So not just have they changed boss, they've also changed access to that inner circle. So they were formerly part of the decision-making unit. They were able to understand what was going on. They'd hear it firsthand. It wasn't, perhaps censored in a way that they feel it is now. And actually, the whole relationship with their old boss was one where it was kind of just get on with it. I trust you to make it happen. And now the environment has changed, so that the new boss basically has got to get a grip of things and got to be very much able to articulate why they're doing what they're doing, what the reason for things are. There's a real clear focus on getting value for money, all of those things. And of course, there's a style change that goes, do they not trust me anymore? And actually, that's not the point. The environment has changed, and your boss has changed in that way, and you've got to find a new way of working together. And actually, my role is to play devil's advocate for them. So I'm almost going, well, I can imagine your boss is thinking this. I imagine, and they go, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, and I think that's not an uncommon thing to when the bad boss question comes up. I do think as a coach, sometimes you have to play devil's advocate and go, well, let's explore that for a second. And I'm not saying your boss isn't a bad boss. Sadly, I think we come across bad bosses way more often than we should. However, a lot of the time, perception is a key player in this, and people sometimes label somebody as a bad boss when what they actually mean is they're a different management style. The world has changed. And I feel stressed or uncomfortable within that, so I'm going to blame the boss.
Yeah, because I'm now being asked questions I wasn't being asked before because I was trusted. And now the new boss, understandably, is going to want to understand, how does this work? How does this all hang together? What does this mean? What are we trying to achieve? What are the goals here? And they're all questions that you were kind of left to work out yourself before, in my particular example that I'm talking about.
So let's assume for this podcast then that you've done that piece of work and you've really challenged yourself to go, well, is this boss being tough but reasonable, or is this boss being unreasonable? And I think some of the things that I would identify as being unreasonable, toxic behaviors from your boss, where they say one thing to you and they say something else to somebody else, or they gossip, or that kind of stuff. That I think is a sign of a bad boss.
Well, they might be disorganized, aren't
Yeah,
they? I mean,
yeah.
and by that, what I mean is, quite often we expect our bosses to have all the answers, and often they don't. Particularly if they're in the same state of flux or change that we are, they might not have yet worked out what this all means, and therefore can't necessarily articulate it. So they might come across as disorganized. But of course, there are bosses that are just genuinely disorganized, can't understand what the key priorities are. So everything becomes important, because what they can't do is manage upwards in terms of what the priorities are, whether that be a clear set of priorities, a clear set of deliverables, and that then causes them to look even worse, disorganized.
Yeah, and you get some who can't communicate as well. And I don't mean they can't talk. I mean, obviously they can talk, but they can't communicate honestly and openly. They can't be transparent. So, I think of an example of working for somebody who basically just couldn't say I don't know, and therefore would lead you down routes. And he wasn't a bad person; he was a lovely person, but he would lead you down routes that were wasting everybody's time, when actually what he could have done was just gone, hey, we haven't made that decision yet, or I don't know what the answer is, or that's a really interesting question, it's not come up before. But he would never do that. He would kind of give you an answer, mostly made up on the spot, that made you think that there was more information or more clarity than there really was, and it would waste a lot of time.
Yeah, that makes, well, it triggers some memories for me about bosses that are not transparent and clear,
Yeah.
and therefore they send you off to do a job. You think you've got a level of freedom and perhaps autonomy. You come back and they go, "That's not what I asked for." And you go, "Well, you weren't clear." And you go, "Is that on me or is that on them?" And I'm the one that ends up feeling like I've failed. Um, and actually, knowing what we know about leadership means, clarity's on us first and foremost, because if we leave it to chance, then guess what? The result's going to be left to chance.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you see a lot in bad bosses in that sense is um, either not giving you the time or not giving you, the sort of level of clarity. Often because they don't know, or they've not spent any time thinking about it, but they're kind of asking for stuff with very clear ideas in their head, but they can't articulate it, and so you'll kind of have to constantly guess. I think I'm doing this, but what's the expectation? And it works both ways, because I've seen people who, bosses who've sort of come to us and started in coaching and gone, my people are lost. I want something simple and they give me something really complex. I ask the answer to a question and I get a 20-page report back. And you go, well, did you tell them you wanted a paragraph, not a 20-page report? Did you tell them, were you clear in the expectation? And they don't know how to do that sometimes.
Did you put a blindfold on them and then ask them to hit a moving target? That's a good question, because the reality is that that's essentially what you've just described.
Sounds like a good Sunday night quiz game, though, doesn't it? Wasn't that actually on the telly when you were a kid or something?
A golden shot, Bernie the
Yeah.
Bolt. And you've got to be in black and white days to remember that. And I only remember it because my parents used to watch it.
Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do.
No, one of our business partners might have watched it, Rob. Well, no, they might not have had it in some of the places he grew up.
Yeah, let's not go there. So you can sort of say there's a number of things that a bad boss does, but I think you can again start to go. There are different types of bad boss. There are toxic bosses. There are bosses that would hang you out to dry, not have any empathy, not be considerate, are basically all about their own agenda. And then there are bosses that are quite nice people who are disorganized or aren't able to provide clarity, or aren't able to service the team around them in a way that they need to be serviced. And they're different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I suppose that's about, if you want to deal with a bad boss, you can play the victim card that says, woe is me, they're terrible, they're this, that, or the other. Or you can adopt a different approach here. And I think you talk about perspective a lot, earlier in this, but you go, okay, so get good at asking questions that get clarity. Get questions that say, can I be clear what you expect and by when? What does that look like? Brené Brown uses this brilliant term called paint done for me.
Oh, nice.
So she uses it actually in the opposite context, which is, I'm going to check that I've articulated what I've asked for by asking you to paint done for me. But you can use that in reverse by going to your boss, paint done for me, or words to that effect that you're comfortable with, that says, describe that almost in picture perfect clarity, that I know exactly what you're going to expect. It's a one pager. It's a presentation deck of no more than X slides. It's a completed video, whatever it might be. Your job, if you want to own this and take responsibility for it, to making sure your bad boss doesn't impact you as they could do, get good at asking questions around clarity.
Yeah, and I think also if your boss is, and again, difference between I'm going to say disorganized and toxic as the sort of two big bad boss styles. If it's a case of your boss can't create clarity, that's quite a powerful skill, because after a while you're going to start be known as the person in the team who can help the boss think.
Yes.
And you might actually find that then the boss comes to you more often to talk to you, because you can help them think, because you can help them go from, we need to do something like this and it's got 72 bits in it, to, oh, we're going to start here, we're going to do this bit and then that bit.
And I think that's really important, though, because actually the more senior you get, access to information, whilst is broader, you're left to make your interpretation as a boss about where to go and how to make this work. And if you can't either crystallize that in your mind, or worse, articulate it either, then you are going to need somebody who can act as that foil for you to get you to crystallize it, to get you to get that point of clarity before you set a load of hairs running in terms of resources or people working on stuff. Busyness versus business.
Yes. So let's tackle for a few moments then the other side of the coin, which is the generally toxic boss, the kind of person who has their own interests at heart, isn't necessarily caring for their employees in a way that you might want, isn't going to help you do the things you want to do and succeed in the way that you might want to succeed. Because these people are interesting, and you are going to come up against them at some point in your career, because there's enough of them out there. But they're not everywhere. I mean, let's just be really clear. I think a lot of people get described as a bad boss and being toxic when actually they're just a bit disorganized, or they're just a little bit distracted, or they're just a bit under pressure themselves, and they haven't got the time and the mental capacity to do what you quite need, because they're, in it from their boss, or from, the expectations placed on them. But when you do come across a toxic one, similar skills play out here, because I think, like you say, if you can ask great questions, what you can do is then start documenting. So you can start saying, all right, we had this conversation. This is what I think you're expecting me to do. This is what I think the timelines are. And it's how you do that I think is really key, because I've seen people who do that almost like I'm covering my arse, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And I think if it comes across like that, that creates unnecessary conflict. But if you do it in a subtly different way, and the way I always say to people is think about, do it in a way of, I'm just checking with you. This is our last chance. It's just like an end piece to the conversation where I'm confirming that I've understood, and you have every right as the boss to come back and go, actually, that's not quite what I meant. It does two things. It starts building a different level of relationship between you and them, because it starts building much more clarity. But it also backs you up, because if they are a really toxic boss and you need to come back and they say, you said you'd do this by Tuesday, and you go, well, actually, I said Thursday, here's the email. It's quite a useful thing to have.
That kind of reminds me of the work that we do a lot around expectations management. And this is more than, goal defining and things like that, but this is about perhaps the forerunner to that, the psychological, how do we get the best out of each other conversation, but is absolutely supplemented with, so how do we let each other know then? Because
Yeah.
actually, your boss tends not to be toxic on day one. There tends to be at least a honeymoon period. It might not be long, but there tends to be one. And that's your window of opportunity to really set the scene in terms of how you're going to work together, so that when they don't live up to what they've said they'll do, and this is a two-way street, by the way, so it's not just you on them, they could also come back on you, but also going, how do we let each other know? What does that conversation look like? So almost the rules of the game are there, so that when you are documenting stuff, it's really clear that you're saying, to your point, my job is to get clarity, get you what you want, so that we can deliver against our goals, because they're never going to argue against that higher purpose that we're here to deliver something. So therefore, that should be a commonality between you. What you're disagreeing on potentially is the how. You want to do it one way, they want to do it another way.
Yeah.
So how do you literally play that back, as you said, like perhaps in an email, the cover the arse piece, but actually you're doing it because you don't want to be left high and dry on the back of a conversation they may confirm or deny.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing for me is that when these situations occur, what spins them out of control really quickly isn't really the day-to-day interaction. It's the emotion that gets laid over this. Because the second it becomes emotional, either from the boss's part or from your part, you're now in this kind of he said, she said
That's easier for you to say.
assumptions. Yeah. Do you get what I mean? It just, it starts getting out of control. I'm just moving on here. It starts getting out of control really quickly, because you're having this emotive conversation, and very rarely do you win emotive conversations. You just get each other upset.
Well, it comes back to your old, the statement you use a lot, which I really love, which is do you want to be right or do you want to win? Because there are two different outcomes here.
Yeah.
And one involves a fight, but it all comes back to kind of 101 in any management and leadership manual, which is clarity. If you're both clear about what the outcome needs to be, and you're both clear about what perhaps some of the inputs and outputs that are going to be created along the way. So I might want it to look and feel this way as the boss. That's my prerogative. You might disagree. Well, the time to have that disagreement or that conversation is before anybody starts anything, so we know what the rules we're playing to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you have to accept at some point, and like you said, the boss has a prerogative of going, well, at the end of the day, I'm the one, who's the boss, and therefore I'm going to get to make some decisions. And if that really upsets you, if you get to the point where you go, I can't live with those decisions, then accept that might be that for whatever reason you're in the wrong place. And I've only ever really felt like that once in my career, a long time ago. But it was a tough thing to go, this doesn't work for me. And that is as much on me as it is on them. but this doesn't work for me. I don't want to work in this way or be treated in this way or do these things. But I have to recognize there was a load of other people there who were absolutely fine with it. So it was a style thing from me. The bit where I think it becomes a bit more dangerous is when the boss then does move to this really toxic kind of bullying behavior. And again, if you've documented everything, that's going to help protect you. But you may have to accept that sometimes really bad bosses, and if you're fortunate enough to work for a really bad boss, and I'm sorry if you do, but if you do work for a really bad boss, the best thing you can do is take yourself out of that situation, because there are other bosses elsewhere who are really good.
Yeah, you've got to come back to what's the impact on you, your performance, your mental health,
Yeah.
because, and I suppose the challenge with some of that is often we blame ourselves, and it's not always the case. We are, part of the problem, but we're also part of the solution, to your point, that says, can you get clarity? Can you get a balanced view of this, not an emotional view of this? Can you provide feedback that is constructive? And if you can't achieve what you need, then you've really got to bring it back to documenting what's gone on, being really specific, really, really factual, really clear, so that when it comes to making that move on decision, or you're going to address it through maybe some formal channels, you've got the evidence that you need.
I think back to there's a model we sometimes use when we're talking about change, but I think it's really relevant here, which is when you're in a really difficult situation, like having a boss that's toxic, it comes down to kind of 4 areas of choice. So firstly is, can you change this situation? Can you invest in the relationship, do the right things, move the relationship to a different place? And if the answer to that is no, I think, can you engage with this? Can you go and talk to other people, talk to HR, get some support, get some help to deal with that situation? And sometimes the answer is no. And then you're really left to 2 choices: escape it or live with it. And if you're going to live with it, the one thing you can't do is live with it and let it hurt you every day. If you're deciding to stay in a situation where you don't quite like the way things are done, you have to accept that's the way they're done. And you can't come in every day and fight them and moan about them, because you'll just eat yourself alive.
Yeah, there is no future in that.
And therefore, if you can't do that, if you can't genuinely live with it and let go of what's going on, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes, you like I say, I've had it once and it was only for a few months, but I kind of just went, this hurts me every day. This is emotionally toxic. You have to go, nah, I'm done. There are other jobs out there. But I think the thing you and I probably come across a lot is people who pretend to live with it. They just turn up every day and complain.
Yeah,
And that's not a healthy place.
they kind of normalize it, and those that are proactive will find a way of quitting. They might do it at a timeline to suit them. They might wait until there's an optimum time in terms of, the right job or the right opportunity coming up. But the reality is, you kind of go, how can you do your bit that means that the next person in your shoes doesn't suffer the same fate?
Yeah.
And I know that's tough.
It's really tough. And the one last point, I think, just as we close this down, the one thing you hear a lot about now is this idea of quiet quitting. This idea of going, well, I'm gonna quit but not leave. I'm gonna turn up every day and do as little as possible and not engage. And again, I get it. I get why somebody would do it, but it's not a very healthy place to be long term for your own self-esteem and your own well-being. And I think the one thing I think a lot of people miss about the quiet quitting thing is it hurts everybody. It hurts the boss, it hurts the organization, but it hurts you as well.
Absolutely.
Next time on The Question Is.
The other thing I think goes on when you go to say no to somebody is we often mistake no to the task to no to the person. So we personalize it. If I say no to you, the question I'm answering isn't, do you have time to do this task? I'm answering, do you like me?
To find out how thinking focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.